It started with the silence, not the peaceful kind, but a silence that pressed in, a heavy blanket that muffled even the sound of my own breathing. I remember thinking, as I pulled the rental car up the gravel track, that this was exactly what I'd wanted. Escape. A week alone in a remote cabin, deep in the whispering pines of northern Maine, far from the incessant hum of city life and the echoes of a recent, messy breakup. I craved solitude, a chance to reset. What I got was something far more profound and infinitely more terrifying. The cabin itself was exactly as pictured online, rustic, charming, nestled amongst towering, ancient pines that seemed to claw at the sky. A small stone fireplace dominated the living room, and the scent of old wood and pine needles hung in the air. It felt isolated, perfectly isolated. The nearest town was a good 45 minutes drive, and my phone signal had died about 10 miles back. Bliss, or so I thought. The first night was uneventful, peaceful even. I cooked a simple meal, read by the fire, and fell asleep to the gentle creaks of the old cabin settling. But the next morning, things began to shift. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible. I'd left my coffee mug on the kitchen counter, but when I returned from the bathroom, it was on the small dining table. I shrugged it off, attributing it to my own forgetfulness, a byproduct of being overly tired. Then, later that day, I distinctly remembered placing my book, a dog-eared paperback, on the bedside table. When I went to pick it up, it was on the floor, open to a random page, face down. A little odd, but still, easily dismissed. The cabin was old, maybe the floor wasn't perfectly level. The whispers started on the third night. I woke abruptly, my heart hammering, convinced I'd heard my name. A soft, sibilant sound, like dry leaves skittering across a wooden floor, or perhaps a voice, just at the edge of hearing. I sat up, straining my ears, but there was nothing. Only the oppressive silence, now punctuated by the frantic drumming of my own pulse. I told myself it was the wind, playing tricks through the ancient pines, or my mind, still reeling from the stress I'd tried to leave behind. I pulled the blanket tighter, trying to convince myself I was safe. The next day, the feeling of being watched became almost unbearable. Every time I turned, I felt a prickling sensation on the back of my neck. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to deepen, to coalesce into vague shapes. I found myself constantly glancing over my shoulder, my breath catching in my throat. I tried to distract myself, going for a walk in the woods, but the trees felt too close, too tall, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching down. The whispers seemed to follow me, carried on the breeze, just out of reach. I even started talking to myself, just to break the suffocating quiet, to hear a human voice, my own. That evening, I decided to build a roaring fire, hoping its warmth and light would chase away the growing unease. As I knelt, arranging the logs, I noticed something tucked behind the cast iron grate, a small wooden box, intricately carved, but worn smooth with age. My curiosity, a dangerous thing in retrospect, got the better of me. I pulled it out, my fingers tracing the faded symbols on its lid. It wasn't locked. Inside, nestled on a bed of brittle, yellowed lace, was a single tarnished silver locket. It was cold to the touch, unnaturally so. And then I saw it, etched crudely on the inside of the locket, almost invisible against the darkened metal, was a single word: help. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just an old cabin with creaky floors. This was something else. Someone had been here before me, and they had been desperate. I tried to rationalize it, maybe an old prank, a forgotten prop, but the feeling of dread, now a tangible weight in my chest, told me otherwise. I snapped the locket shut, shoved it back into the box, and pushed the box deep under the grate, out of sight. I didn't want to know. I really didn't, but knowing or not knowing didn't stop it. That night, the whispers weren't just whispers. They were distinct, guttural sounds, like someone struggling to breathe, or trying to speak through a mouthful of gravel. They came from the attic, directly above my bedroom. Thump, scrape, drag. It sounded like something heavy was being moved, slowly, deliberately, across the floorboards. I lay rigid in bed, my eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, listening to the horrifying symphony above me. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was paralyzed by fear. The sounds continued for what felt like hours, a relentless, torturous rhythm that burrowed into my brain. The next morning, I was a wreck, exhausted, terrified, my nerves frayed. I knew I had to leave. I packed my bag in a frantic blur, my hands shaking so badly I could barely zip the suitcase. As I hurried towards the front door, I caught a glimpse of something in the reflection of the large living room window. Standing directly behind me, in the doorway of the kitchen, was a figure, tall, gaunt, its outline indistinct against the darker interior of the cabin. It wasn't moving, just standing there, watching me. I froze, my heart seizing in my chest. I couldn't turn around. I couldn't. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get out, but my feet were rooted to the spot. The silence in the cabin intensified, becoming a roar in my ears. Then, slowly, agonizingly slowly, the reflection in the window began to move. The figure took a step forward, then another. It was getting closer. With a primal scream tearing from my throat, I lunged for the front door, fumbling with the latch. My fingers were numb, clumsy. The figure was almost upon me. I could feel a cold breath on my neck, smell something ancient and decaying. Finally, the latch clicked open. I burst out of the cabin, not even bothering to close the door behind me, and sprinted towards the car. I didn't look back. I just ran, my lungs burning, my legs pumping, the gravel biting at my bare feet. I hadn't even stopped to put on shoes. I tore open the car door, threw myself inside, and jammed the key into the ignition. The engine coughed, sputtered, and then, mercifully, roared to life. I slammed the gear into reverse, spinning the tires on the gravel, desperate to put as much distance between myself and that cabin as possible. As I sped down the narrow track, the cabin shrinking in my rearview mirror, I risked a quick glance. The front door was still wide open, a gaping maw in the rustic facade, and standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the dim interior, was the figure. It was clearer now, a skeletal form, impossibly thin, with long, stringy hair that seemed to writhe in the non-existent breeze. Its head was tilted, as if observing my frantic escape. And then, as I rounded the bend and the cabin disappeared from view, I heard it, a faint, mournful wail, carried on the wind through the whispering pines, a sound that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. I drove for hours, not stopping until I hit a gas station in a brightly lit, bustling town. My phone, miraculously, had a signal again. I called the rental company, stammering out a story about a sudden family emergency, anything to avoid explaining the truth. I never mentioned the locket, or the figure, or the whispers. Who would believe me? I returned the car, bought a plane ticket home, and tried to forget. But some things, once seen, once felt, can never truly be forgotten. Even now, years later, the silence still presses in sometimes. And when the wind whispers through the trees outside my window, I swear I can still hear my name, just at the edge of hearing, carried on a breeze from the deepest, darkest corners of the whispering pines. And I wonder, sometimes, if the locket is still there, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to stumble upon its desperate plea, and if the figure still stands in the doorway, watching, waiting for its next guest. The first thing that hits you when you dive deep into truly untouched waters isn't the cold or the pressure, but the overwhelming blue. It's a blue so profound, so absolute, it feels less like a color and more like a state of being. You float, suspended, a tiny speck in an infinite sapphire. And for a marine biologist like me, Maya, it was pure, unadulterated bliss, a weightlessness that erased the crushing weight of a recent grant rejection, the sting of a colleague's betrayal, the general suffocating noise of the world above. This remote island in the South Pacific, with its pristine, almost mythical coral reefs, was supposed to be my sanctuary, my chance to reconnect with the only thing that truly made sense, the silent, ancient world beneath the waves. My bungalow was a dream, perched on stilts over water so clear you could count the individual grains of sand 50 feet below. Every morning, I'd wake to the gentle lapping of waves, the sun already searing the horizon, and the promise of another dive. The local dive master, an old man named Kyle, with a face like weathered teak and eyes that seemed to hold the secrets of the deep, had given me a brief, unsettling warning on my arrival. "The reef, she is old," he'd rasped, his voice like grinding coral. "Some parts, they sleep. Do not wake them." I'd nodded, smiled, and dismissed it as charming local superstition. Scientists don't believe in sleeping reefs. The first few days were everything I'd hoped for. The reef teemed with life, iridescent parrotfish, schools of shimmering barracuda, graceful manta rays gliding through the sun-dappled water. I meticulously documented new species of coral, my camera clicking almost constantly. But then, I started noticing it. Not a specific thing, but an absence. In certain deeper sections, particularly those closest to the island's less explored eastern side, there was an unnatural calm. No small fish darting, no gentle sway of anemones, just an unnerving quiet. The current, usually a constant companion, seemed to vanish, leaving the water strangely still, almost stagnant. I attributed it to unique geological formations, perhaps sheltered pockets. My scientific brain sought logical explanations. It was on the third deep dive, exploring one of these unnervingly quiet zones, that I first heard it. A sound, faint, rhythmic, like a low thrumming or a soft, sibilant whispering. It seemed to emanate from the very coral itself, vibrating through the water, directly into my bones. I paused, hovering, my heart giving a little lurch. Too deep for boat engines, too regular for natural ocean sounds. I checked my regulators, my tank, my dive computer. Everything was functioning perfectly. I shook my head, convinced it was auditory hallucination, a trick of the pressure, or simply my overactive imagination, still processing the stress of the past few months. I pushed deeper. That's when I started finding the coral. Not the vibrant, familiar structures, but something else entirely. Massive, almost grotesque formations that pulsed faintly with an internal, phosphorescent light. They were unlike anything I'd ever seen or read about. Their textures were wrong, not rough or porous, but smooth, almost fleshy, with a strange, cool resilience. I collected samples, carefully chipping away small pieces, my excitement battling with a growing sense of unease. This was a monumental discovery, something new, potentially revolutionary, but their unnatural feel, the way they seemed to subtly shift under my touch, sent a shiver down my spine even in the warm water. The deeper I went, the more pronounced the anomalies became. The vibrant ecosystem thinned out dramatically. The beautiful fish were gone, replaced by the strange, pulsating coral, which now grew in vast, unsettling gardens. And the whispers, they were no longer faint. They were a chorus, a low, guttural murmur that seemed to fill the water, pressing in on my eardrums, echoing in my mind. It wasn't just sound. It felt like a presence, an ancient, watchful awareness. I found myself constantly scanning the dark periphery beyond my dive light, convinced something was out there, just beyond my sight. That night, the dreams began. Vivid, suffocating nightmares of being pulled down into an endless abyss. I was surrounded by the glowing, whispering entities, their light growing brighter, their murmurs coalescing into a single, overwhelming thought that wasn't my own. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, gasping for air, the taste of salt still on my tongue, feeling as though I'd just been submerged in something vast and unknowable. The bungalow, once a sanctuary, now felt like a fragile shell, floating precariously over an unseen horror. Kale, the old dive master, noticed my change. My usual boundless energy was replaced by a haunted pallor, my eyes constantly darting. He found me one morning staring out at the ocean, a half-eaten breakfast untouched. "The reef, she sings to you, yes?" he rumbled, his voice surprisingly gentle. "The sleeper stirs, she calls." He told me ancient legends, passed down through generations, of a colossal, living entity that rested beneath the island, a thing older than time, that would occasionally awaken and draw things into its grasp. The whispers, he said, were its song, a lure. He pleaded with me to stay away from the eastern side, from the deepest parts. I tried to dismiss it, to cling to my scientific skepticism, but his eyes, so old and full of sorrow, held a truth I couldn't deny. The seed of doubt had taken root, and it was blossoming into full-blown dread. But the scientist in me, the part that craved discovery, that needed to understand, was stronger than the fear. Or perhaps it was the lure of the whispers, now a constant hum in my ears even on land, that compelled me. I had to see. I had to know. The next morning, against every instinct of self-preservation, I prepared for an unscheduled dive to the deepest, most unnervingly silent part of the reef I'd found. My hands trembled as I checked my gear, the rhythmic thump-thump of my heart echoing in the quiet bungalow. I descended slowly, the light fading as I went deeper, the water growing colder. The whispers grew louder, clearer, no longer just sounds but a cacophony of ancient, unintelligible voices that seemed to resonate directly inside my skull. My dive light cut through the gloom, revealing the vast, pulsating gardens of alien coral. And then I saw it, the cavern, a massive, gaping maw in the seafloor, unlike anything natural. It wasn't a cave or a fissure. It was an opening, lined with the same glowing, unnatural coral, which pulsed with an almost blinding intensity. The whispers here were deafening, a chorus of hungry, waiting voices. I hovered at the edge, my breath catching in my throat, the air in my tank suddenly feeling thin. And then I saw them, shadowy, indistinct shapes moving within the abyss. Too large to be fish, too slow to be currents. They were amorphous, shifting, like liquid darkness given form. I realized, with a jolt of pure, unadulterated terror, that the coral wasn't just growing on something. It was something. It was part of a vast, living organism, an unimaginable entity that extended into the crushing, lightless unknown. The whispers weren't just sounds. They were its thoughts, its ancient, insatiable hunger. A sudden, powerful current, seemingly from nowhere, began to pull me towards the opening. My fins kicked frantically, desperately, but it was like swimming against a monstrous tide. The whispers intensified, now a guttural, predatory hum that vibrated through my entire body. My air gauge flickered wildly, then went blank. My dive computer died. I was blind, adrift, being drawn into the maw. I felt a cold, slimy touch against my leg, then my arm. I spun around, my dive light useless against the swirling darkness, seeing nothing but the glowing coral and the swirling abyss. I managed to break free of the immediate pull, but now I felt hunted. The whispers were no longer just invading my mind. They were a direct command, urging me deeper, promising something unspeakable. Massive, fleeting shadows darted in the periphery of my vision, just beyond the reach of my failing light. They were fast, impossibly fast. Panic clawed at my throat. I had to get out. Then, I saw it. A glint of metal. My small, weighted research camera, the one I dropped days ago, now resting on a ledge near the abyss. It was a lure, a trap. As I hesitated, a tendril of the glowing coral, thicker than my arm, detached itself from the opening and snaked towards me, moving with terrifying speed. It wasn't just coral, it was an appendage, reaching. I kicked, a desperate, adrenaline-fueled surge, narrowly avoiding the grasping tendril. My air supply was dangerously low, the pressure in my ears screaming. I began a rapid, reckless ascent, knowing the risks of decompression sickness, but preferring any agony to staying in that water for another second. The whispers followed me, even as I broke the surface, gasping for air, clawing at the ladder of my bungalow. I collapsed onto the wooden deck, shivering uncontrollably, salt water stinging my eyes. I looked out at the ocean, the beautiful, terrifying blue. KL, the old dive master, was in his boat, watching me. His face was etched with a knowing, mournful look. I never told him what I saw, what I felt. Who would believe me? I left the island that very day, abandoning my research, my equipment, everything. I bought the first flight out, desperate to put as much distance between myself and that reef as possible. Back home, thousands of miles from the ocean, I tried to forget. But some things, once touched, once heard, can never truly be erased. Even now, years later, I still hear the whispers. In the hum of the refrigerator, the rush of water in the shower, the static on the radio. They are faint, but constant, a low, rhythmic thrumming that never truly leaves me. And sometimes, when I'm alone, I catch a glimpse of it, a faint, almost imperceptible glow emanating from my skin, right where that tendril touched me. It's the same phosphorescent light as the alien coral. I try to wash it off, to scrub it away, but it's in me. The ocean, or whatever ancient horror lies beneath its untouched surface, has left its mark. I am no longer just hearing the whispers. I am becoming a part of them. The vacation ended, but the horror never did. I am slowly being consumed, from the inside out, by the very thing I discovered, a quiet, inexorable absorption into the ancient, whispering reef. After years of saving and planning, this solo trip was supposed to be my grand adventure, a dive into culture and self-discovery. I'd booked a charming, supposedly historic apartment through a lesser-known online service. Authentic Prague living, the listing promised. A true step back in time. It certainly was, a step back perhaps, into something that never truly left. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a centuries-old building, tucked away down a quiet alley. The heavy wooden door, studded with black iron, creaked open to reveal a surprisingly spacious interior. High ceilings, ornate plasterwork, and tall, arched windows that looked out onto a small, enclosed courtyard. It had an immediate, heavy silence, the kind that swallows sound. Not the peaceful silence of the Maine cabin, but a silence that felt expectant, like the air itself was holding its breath. I shrugged it off, attributing it to the thick stone walls. It was old, after all. Beautiful, but undeniably old. The first oddity was the clock. A beautiful, antique grandfather clock stood in the corner of the living room, its pendulum still. I'd noticed it on arrival, admired its craftsmanship, and decided not to wind it. I preferred the quiet. But on my second morning, as I sat sipping coffee, I heard it. A soft, rhythmic tick-tock. I looked up, startled. The clock, its pendulum was swinging, slowly, deliberately. I walked over, my brow furrowed. It couldn't be. I hadn't touched it. I checked the time. It was exactly 7:15 a.m. I stared at it for a long moment. Then, feeling a prickle of unease, I reached out and stopped the pendulum. Just a quirk of an old mechanism, I told myself. The building settling. Later that day, I found my journal open on the coffee table. I was meticulous about my journal. It was always tucked away in my backpack when I wasn't writing in it. This time, it was open to a blank page, the pen resting beside it. I felt a chill, despite the warmth of the apartment. My mind raced through possibilities. Had I left it out? No, I was certain I hadn't. Had the cleaning service come? The listing said no daily service. I felt a growing sense of being observed, a phantom gaze on my back. I started locking the apartment door even when I was inside. A silly precaution, but it made me feel marginally safer. The whispers began on the 4th night. Not the indistinct murmurs of the ocean, but faint, almost melodic sounds, like a lullaby sung in a language I didn't understand. They seemed to drift from the walls themselves, from the very fabric of the old building. I'd trace them, moving from room to room, but they would always recede, just out of reach. I tried to record them on my phone, but the playback only yielded static. I started sleeping with the lights on, the soft glow of the bedside lamp a small comfort against the encroaching darkness and the unseen presence. The feeling of being watched escalated into a profound sense of intrusion. I'd walk into a room and feel a sudden, sharp drop in temperature, as if someone had just passed through. Objects would shift. A book on the shelf nudged out of place, a chair subtly angled differently, a single antique teacup, one I hadn't touched, now sitting on the edge of the kitchen counter. It was like living with a poltergeist, but one that was less interested in throwing things and more interested in subtly asserting its presence, like a cat playing with a mouse. I started talking aloud to myself, just to break the suffocating quiet, to hear a human voice, my own. My research into the building's history began out of curiosity, then quickly morphed into a desperate need for answers. The building manager, a stern woman who spoke little English, had been unhelpful. So, I turned to the internet, to local archives, to dusty old books in English-language bookstores. What I found was piecemeal, fragmented, but terrifyingly consistent. The apartment, specifically this apartment, had a dark past. It had been the site of a series of unexplained disappearances in the late 19th century. A young woman, a visiting scholar, then a family, all vanished without a trace. The local police reports were inconclusive, filled with theories of elopement or emigration, but one recurring detail chilled me to the bone. Each disappearance was preceded by reports from neighbors of strange, melodic singing emanating from the apartment, and a pervasive, unsettling silence that followed. The midpoint hit when I tried to leave. The fear, the paranoia, had become unbearable. I packed my bags, my hands shaking, my mind racing. I just needed to get out, but as I reached for the doorknob, I felt it. A profound, crushing wave of despair, a sadness so intense it felt like my own. It wasn't just a feeling, it was a memory, or a fragment of one. Not mine. A vision flashed in my mind. A young woman, weeping, staring out of the very window I was standing next to, her face etched with hopelessness. I recoiled, gasping for air, the doorknob cold under my clammy hand. My legs felt like lead. I couldn't move. I couldn't leave. It was as if the apartment itself had become a living entity, its sorrow a physical barrier. The whispers intensified, no longer just a lullaby, but distinct words, though still in that ancient, unintelligible tongue. They were seductive, comforting, yet utterly terrifying. They promised solace, understanding, an end to my own anxieties, if only I would. What? Listen closer? Give in? I found myself drawn to the antique clock, its pendulum now swinging wildly, ticking out a frantic rhythm. I felt a growing compulsion to wind it, to make it work, to make it chime. The entity wasn't a ghost in the traditional sense, not a lingering spirit. It was something far more insidious. It fed on despair, on loneliness, on the subtle anxieties that brought people like me, seeking escape, to its doorstep. It didn't want to scare me away. It wanted to consume me. It wanted my emotions, my memories, my very essence, the shifting objects, the whispers, the visions. They weren't random acts of a poltergeist. They were manipulations, carefully orchestrated to break down my mental defenses, to draw me deeper into its web. The apartment was its stomach, and I was slowly being digested. The true horror wasn't just being trapped. It was the realization that I was part of a larger, ongoing cycle. The vanished scholars, the families, they hadn't just disappeared. They had been absorbed. Their despair, their fear, their very being had been consumed, adding to the entity's strength, its ancient, echoing song. I was the next course. I fought back. I tried to focus on my own memories, to cling to my identity. I played music on my phone, loud and jarring, anything to drown out the whispers. I opened all the windows, letting the cool Prague air rush in, hoping to dispel the oppressive atmosphere. But the whispers only grew louder, more insistent, weaving themselves into the music, turning it discordant. The air grew colder, the light dimmer, even with the windows open. The apartment was fighting back. One evening, I woke to find myself standing in front of the grandfather clock. Its pendulum was swinging with a furious, almost violent rhythm. The whispers were a roar now. Inside my head, a chorus of voices, some familiar, some utterly alien. I could feel the entity pressing in, its presence a cold, heavy weight on my chest. It wanted me to wind the clock. I knew, instinctively, that winding it would be the final act, the moment of surrender. It was a ritual, a gateway. My hand reached out, trembling, towards the winding key. I could feel the pull, the overwhelming desire to give in, to let the despair wash over me, to join the chorus of voices. But then, a flicker, a memory of my sister's laugh, a sharp, clear image of sunlight on a mountain trail, a tiny spark of defiance. With a guttural cry, I slammed my fist against the clock face. The glass shattered, the pendulum stopped with a tortured groan, and the whispers, for a single blessed moment, went silent. The silence was even more terrifying than the noise. It was the silence of a predator momentarily stunned, not defeated. I knew I had to run. This time, there was no emotional barrier, no phantom sadness, just a raw, primal urge to escape. I grabbed my backpack, not even bothering to zip it, and stumbled out of the apartment, leaving the shattered clock, the open journal, and the lingering dread behind. I ran down the 3 flights of stairs, my bare feet slapping against the cold stone. I burst out into the alley, the cool rain a shock against my feverish skin. I didn't stop until I reached the main street, until I was surrounded by the noise and light of the city, the reassuring presence of other people. I never looked back. I left Prague the next day, abandoning my luggage, my deposit, everything. I didn't care. I just needed to be away, back home, thousands of miles away. The physical distance should have brought peace, but the horror wasn't something I could leave behind. Even now, months later, I still hear the whispers. They are faint, almost imperceptible, but they are there. A low, melodic hum at the edge of my hearing, especially when I'm alone, especially in the quiet of my own apartment. And sometimes, when I look at old photographs or recall a distant memory, I feel a strange emptiness, a subtle void where a detail or a feeling should be. It's as if pieces of me, tiny fragments of my essence, were left behind, or perhaps were taken. The vacation ended, but the echo of that apartment, and whatever ancient hunger resided within it, continues to resonate. And I wonder, sometimes, if the clock in that apartment ever started ticking again, waiting for its next guest, its next meal,